CBSE Board, Class 11, History, Chapter 1, Part 7, Audio by Renee Matthew. Can you see the picture of flake tools on the screen here? It has become slimmer towards the end of this picture, where it is thin and it is shaped. You can see that the tools are flattened here. It's not like stones, it is polished and smoothened. So that is known as flake tools, where there is some kind of shaping done for it on one part of the slide. You must be thinking who were using the tools. Of course, humans were using it, but it's not just specific to the humans. You must have seen the birds also using simple tools to make their nest, because they always feed their young ones there, and it has to be hygienic with a lot of social encounters and all that. And while searching for food, foraging means gathering food and searching for food, some chimpanzees also use tools that they have made. When I say tool, it doesn't mean that it has to be made with stone and such kind of hard things. That is what we humans do. But of course, birds and even some of the animals also use tools. So some of the features of human tool making are like, it was not known among the apes in those days, but later as the evolution took place, they also used their own devices to create their own tools. And we have also seen some certain structural and nerve, you can say the kind of changes that took place in the brain, the neurological and anatomical changes which took place, adaptations which took place in the human beings. So what happens is, when there is an evolution, there is a change in the structure of the human beings and also in the nervous system. So definitely the use of hands, the structure of the hands also keep changing. So gradually what will happen, the skills that the hand masters, that will also change. And probably it is due to the important role of tools that human beings always have been using. And when human beings started using the tools, of course they had acquired much of greater memory and lot of intelligence, and they had started showing so much of complex organizational skills also, because without all these skills you will not be able to have tools. Like, you should have the organization power, the kind of arranging power, then the symmetrical power. All those skills were there by this time with greater intelligence and memory power, and that was actually absent in the apes, as you can see on the slide here. Now, the earliest evidence of making and using tools is found in Ethiopia and Kenya, and these were some of the tools which was used by Australopithecus. Like, can you see some of the tools here? You can see that it's not flaked. It is just in its rugged form. It is very different to the ones that you see here. This was probably used by the later versions, like for example the Homo sapiens or the earlier forms of Homo sapiens, but not before that. And this was used by some of the Australopithecus groups, and it was found in Old White George. Do you remember the previous slide in the previous audio? So, as in the case of other activities, we did not know whether tool making was done by men or women or both. That is not very clear. How can we find out that through the fossils or the tools that were discovered? And it is possible that both of them used, because it was used by, it was used for making something, for throwing at the animals, for hunting, gathering. So probably it was used by both. And women in particular might have used tools to obtain food, to cook food and all that, which was used to sustain their children after weaning, after they were actually dependent on the mothers. And about 35,000 years ago, there were a lot of improvement in the techniques that was used to kill animals. Initially, it was just scavenging and foraging, but here you can see the kind of artistry and the skill that they're using. And it is quite evident from the appearance of new tools, like for example the spear throwers, the bow and arrow. These are some of the things which is even used by the tribals. Do you know that tribals even exist now in different parts of the world, and they're very skilled in using spear throwers, bow and arrow, and it is even taught in schools these days, right? So the meat which was obtained through these kind of hunting techniques was processed by removing the bones. They had to remove the bones manually, then they will dry it, smoke and store. So these were some of the procedures which was done to make the food so tasty. And look at the evolution. Earlier it was like scavenging for the food and they would just eat it like that, like animals, raw with blood, uncooked and all that. But now it is like they have got used to all these processes, drying, smoking, storing it. And food could be stored for later consumption. That was a new discovery which they made. Then another point is that it has been asserted that the main advantage which was gained from using a spear thrower was the ability to launch the spear a greater distance. So throwing the spear or launching the spear, as you can see in this picture, requires a lot of skill, the way you hold it and everything. So it was an added advantage to spear the gear at a greater distance, and that was achieved by the leverage effect due to the effective lengthening of the arm. So earlier, one particular point we got is the arm of the ape was not so long. Now, by the evolution or from the process of evolution, the length of the arm has developed. It is longer and very easy to throw it from a distance. The apes couldn't do that. And now it is like along with the skill, they have got these anatomical development also along with neurological development. And there were some other changes also, for example, trapping of fur-bearing animals to use fur for clothing. Till then it was like clothing was not very important. Like now they have learned how to make clothing from the fur of animals, trapping the animals especially which has got fur, and the invention of sewing needles also. And there is a lot of evidence which is collected for the sewn clothing that comes about 21,000 years ago, the sewn clothing. And also the punch blade technique which was used to sew clothes to make small chisel-like tools. It was now possible to make engravings on bone, antler, ivory or wood. So they used to do all these things to make accessories. You can see this previous picture itself, like the Red Indians and all, they'll wear something around their neck and head and all that, like accessories to beautify themselves. So they had access to all these small tools which was a bit more sophisticated compared to the earlier ones. And then modes of communication, language and art. Very important part. Among living beings, it is humans alone that have a language. Of course, animals also have got, but human language is more complex. And there are several views on language development, how it happened, or what is the first form of language. The first point, the hominid language involved gestures or hand movements. Hominid is the one which came from hominoid. Okay, so that involved only gestures, that is just movement with hands, limbs and all that, and hand movements. Second point is that spoken language was preceded by vocal but non-verbal communication such as singing or humming. So first it was like small sounds and gestures like that, something which was just made, and then it developed to vocal but non-verbal communication. Vocal means singing or humming, that's it, nothing more than that. And the way they communicated was very less, communication was very less, and it just involved gestures and hand movements. Then it probably developed into calls like the ones that have been observed among primates, like the animals and the birds, they will have their specific calls to attract each other and to communicate, something similar to that. And human must have possessed a small number of speech sounds in the initial stage to call each other. Gradually, these may have developed into language. So, we can see when we study language that there is something known as phonetics and phonemes, that is speech sound. And it is from the speech sound that language or the other things developed. And when did spoken language actually emerge? It is something which is very important. And it is suggested that the brain of Homo habilis had certain features which would have made it possible for them to speak. So from Homo habilis, they have started to speak is the speculation and the assessment that the, studies have come across and concluded. And thus we can say that language have developed as early as 2 million years ago, and the evolution of the vocal tract was equally important. So why Homo habilis is important? Because it has got features. What is a necessary feature for you to speak? It is the vocal tract. And vocal tract was more developed in the Homo habilis. And the previous apes, in the primates, it was not so developed. Maybe it was grunt and rough and tough, and they just made some kind of ape calls or ape gestures and movements. They were not able to speak. So now the vocal tract was equally important. It was evolved also. And this happened 200,000 years back about Homo habilis, and it is more specifically associated with modern humans and not with the old primates or the old apes, you can say. Now, another suggestion which the scholars have tried to say is that language developed around the same time as art, because art is also a form of language, right? It also communicates, that is 40 to 35,000 years back. And language is closely associated or connected with art, since both are medium for communication, right? And whatever they felt, whatever they saw, everything was depicted on the walls, and it is so beautiful the way they chose colors and painted it and completed it. And hundreds of paintings of animals, which was almost 30,000 years old, was discovered in the caves of Lascaux and Chauvet, both in France, Altamira in Spain. So these places are very important where the paintings were discovered. And what are the paintings? It was mostly of animals such as bison, horse, ibex, deer, mammoths, all these things that they saw, hyenas, owls, all the animals. So from this also we could understand and gather that these animals were present in those days, that is 30,000 years back. But still there were a lot of questions which came up on why do some areas of caves have paintings and not others? Why only some places had? Okay, and why were only some animals painted and not the others? And why were men painted both individually and in groups? Like some men painted both individually and in groups. Why did they do that? Whereas women were depicted only in groups. So this particular point is very important. Men was represented individually and in groups, but women only in groups. Why is that so? And why men painted near animals? Why were men always painted near animals and not women? Okay, is it that women was not present then? And why were groups of animals painted in the sections of caves where sounds carried well, like where they could actually articulate maybe the echoing sound and all that? Only in those kind of caves you can see these paintings and not in the ordinary caves. Did you understand? Where sound carried well, only in such kind of typical caves you can see these paintings. So many questions were there which came up from the discovery. So these give a way for you to think about so many points. Now several explanations were given for all these questions. One is the importance of hunting. The paintings of animals were associated with the ritual and magic of hunting. Hunting had a lot of rituals. It's not that they just went and killed the animals like how the tribals do now. Lot of rituals and magic was associated with hunting. Another explanation which came up was that the caves were the places where people met together for activities. It was a location for group activities, and that is why it was depicted on such kind of caves. And that is a place where they shared their hunting techniques, knowledge on what they're doing, while paintings and engravings served as the media for passing information from one generation to next. So that is a place where they communicated, they could share a lot of things that they learned. Though the vocal cords were not developed, they had some source of sharing. And the above account of early societies has been based on archaeological evidence. Everything that we saw now is based on archaeological evidence. And that is what we know even now. So as mentioned at the beginning of this particular chapter, hunter-gatherer societies exist even today. So those days also we had societies which were formed for hunter-gatherers. And there is one particular question which is posed here. Can one learn anything about past societies from present day hunter-gatherers? How important is hunting, how important is gathering, and how can you assess something from hunter gatherers, and will you be able to understand something after millions of years have passed from now about what is happening now in hunting and gathering. So all these questions were there. So one thing that we can conclude is they used to do it in societies, and why it is found in only particular caves is because it was a place where people shared a lot of things and they sat together for group activities, and it also is a media for passing information to the next generation, and that is why it was so found in such kind of caves where echo was there, or these kind of questions. It has answered some of the questions, not everything, but it has answered some of the questions pretty well.